Hello, it's your girl Lauren Nicole, and I am back with another book review. Today we are covering The Ultimate Gift by Jim Stovall, and yes, there will be spoilers. Let's get into it. So The Ultimate Gift is narrated by a lawyer who is older. He's about 80 years old, named Ted Hamilton. And we find out from the very beginning that one of his clients, who is also one of his closest friends, has passed away. He's an oil and cattle tycoon. This man
He
got money. And so now Ted is in charge of making sure that Red Stevens' estate is handled properly amongst his beneficiaries. Ted works closely with Miss Hastings, whom we can only assume is his assistant. And so the story will follow their efforts as they work to carry out the wishes of Red Stevens. The Stevens family is called into the Hamilton law firm to receive their inheritance. And so Red Stevens' 3 children each get a cut of his empire. His daughter gets his cattle farm in Texas. One of his sons gets all of his stock portfolio. Another son is given charge of his company. But the caveat to each of those inheritances is that none of them can actually be in charge of the company, the ranch, or the portfolios. There is a middleman to manage all of them so that they don't hurt themselves, is what the book says. In order for them to actually continue to maintain the wealth that they were accustomed to. That was their inheritance, but they were charged to have a little bit of help. Now, one of the things that Red requested as a part of the reading of his will was that once someone received their inheritance, they were to leave the room so that nobody could be nosy or upset about what the next man got. The only people who would know what the next person received would be the people next in line. So everyone received their inheritance, and who is left in the room but our main character, which is Jason Stevens. Jason Stevens is the great nephew of Red Stevens, and he is 24. He is spoiled and arrogant and entitled. And Jason is not happy about the way that this is going down because for whatever reason, he's not being given his inheritance quick and easy the way that everyone else has been. He's like, why can't I just get whatever I'm going to get so that I can go home? No, he's asked to sit back because his inheritance is a little different than everyone else's. And so begins a year-long saga in the life of Jason Stevens. So Miss Hastings goes into a room and comes back with a box containing a VHS tape. And on that tape is a video of Red Stevens giving directions to Jason and essentially stating that he had done everyone in his family a misfortune by giving them everything they could have ever wanted. And he had recognized the error in his ways way too late. Red Stevens was a poor man who built his empire. And so all of his heirs were accustomed to a lifestyle and a level of wealth that they did not have to work for, and they also had not come from meager means. And he recognized how much that limited them in so many ways. But he believed that there was still hope with Jason. And so as a part of his inheritance process, he wanted to challenge Jason to understand value, purpose, meaning. So he has to complete several challenges in order to receive the ultimate gift. Initially, Jason is not here for any of this. He's like, why do I have to do all of this? Why can't I just get whatever this inheritance is so that I can go about my life? So this inheritance saga consists of 12 challenges. Every month for the course of the next year, Jason would be challenged to do something in effort for Uncle Red Stevens to instill some sort of gift to him. Now, each of these gifts were intangible, but also priceless. So at the end of each month, Jason was required to report his findings to Ted Hamilton and Miss Hastings, and they would have to determine that whatever it was that he was challenged to do was good enough for him to pass to the next test, if you will. And with each monthly visit, they would play a new tape that Red Stevens had recorded before he passed. So we're going to go through each of the gifts. Bear with me. Bear with me. This is a great book. The first gift was the gift of work. Jason, Ted Hamilton, and Miss Hastings traveled to a ranch in Texas, which was part of where Red Stevens had gained his wealth. And they went to the ranch of one of his longtime friends. And Jason was challenged to stay at this ranch and work for free, doing whatever it is that he was asked to do. So of course he was displeased. He had an attitude. He didn't want to be there. But within a month's time, he had fallen into the groove of doing this farm work, building fences and handling cattle and whatever it is that he was asked to do. And then he went back to New York. In his second challenge, Red Stevens tells him that the amount of work that he had done over the course of that month was worth about $1,500. And so the next challenge was to learn the gift of money. And so he was challenged to take $1,500 and find people with problems that he could help fix. So he went out and came back to report that he had been in a store and overheard some parents who couldn't afford toys for their children, and he gave them a few $100s. He ran into someone who was having car trouble and gave her a couple of $100, that kind of thing. So he meets a young man who's also having some car trouble, and he helps this young man and even spends money out of his own pocket. So he ends up spending more than the $1,500. So he reports this back. And so the next challenge was the gift of friends. Red really wanted Jason to understand that many of Jason's friends were not real friends, but more so around him because of what he had. And Red wanted Jason to understand that he had had true friendships in his life, and he wanted Jason to have the opportunity to cultivate that for himself. So he was challenged to go and try to make friendships. And he reported back that the young man that he ended up helping with the $1,500 challenge was actually growing to be a solid friend for him, and that they had hung out over the course of the month. And he also saw the value of the friendship that Red Stevens had both with Ted Hamilton, but also with the rancher back in Texas, and how they looked out for each other back before they had grown their wealth. The next challenge was the gift of learning. So they told Jason to pack a bag. We're going to tropical weather, and they go down to South America. The book does not specify where, and they find themselves going back into some remote village, and they come across a small building named after Red Stevens. And it's a very small library located in a village. And so he meets the librarian that runs the library. At first he was confused because there were no books in the building, only to learn that it was because all of the villagers had checked out the books, that people traveled for miles just to have access to books to read in their quest to learn. Although there weren't that many options, the fact that that library existed there gave those people a chance to learn, and they were taking full advantage of it. And so he was challenged to help the librarian for the time that they were there. He got a chance to work with that community and to learn about those people and their plight, and really connect with them in a way that he had not gotten from his posh life in New York City. As the challenges continued, Ted Hamilton took note that Jason seemed to be warming up. However, that there were some parts of him that were still a little, resistant to the process. He wanted it to be over. He wanted it to be done, but he was being something of a good sport about it. And so one of the caveats to receiving the ultimate gift was that Jason had to keep a good enough attitude for Ted Hamilton in order for the process to continue. So Ted could have pulled the plug at any time on Jason if he determined that your attitude really just it's not going to work out. So now we're on the edge of our seats, because is he going to make it? He's been living a lush life, and he's being asked to essentially get his hands dirty and meet strangers and do things that are very out of his realm of comfort. But as he presses forward, the next gift is the gift of problems. And so he is challenged to go out and find 4 people who have problems. He's not asked to fix them, simply to connect with people who have problems. The purpose of that exercise was that Red had worked so hard that he had shielded each of his family members from actual issues, that they had not developed any kind of problem solving skills or resilience or ability to overcome things, because he had always taken care of everything. And so he wanted Jason to go out and connect with people who had issues so that he could learn. He wanted him to find a child, a young adult, a middle-aged adult, and an elderly person within the month. And he came back and reported that he was at a park sitting next to a woman watching a young girl play in the park. And this young girl was actually a terminally ill hospital patient who had only asked to be able to have a day of play, which gave him insight into the value of life. Then he met a middle-aged man who had lost his job and was just doing what he could to get by for his family. But he had his wife and he had his children at home. And the man's attitude about his circumstances was still so good that Jason could not quite understand that even though compared to Jason, he didn't have anything, the man was still hopeful. And then he met an elderly man whose wife had just died, but he wasn't sad because he had had 60 years with his wife, and he was grateful to have lived his life with her. So Ted said, but you were challenged to learn about 4 people's problems. And Jason said, if I may, I would like to put myself in the space of the young adult, because I didn't realize how many problems I actually had. He had not previously understood how limited his life had been, despite having anything most people would want. So then he was challenged with the gift of family. And again, Ted Hamilton, Miss Hastings, and Jason take off to another city. They also don't really state where this city is. And they go to a boys' home, only to find out that this boys' home is funded by Red Stevens. And so for 30 days, Jason stands in as a substitute house parent to these young boys that had been orphaned. And he played the role of whatever it is that they might have needed for those 30 days. And upon leaving, he felt connected to these children that ultimately did not have family. And so from that experience, he was given a different perspective about the value of being in his own family, but also about how he could develop chosen family. Then he was challenged with the gift of laughter, and he was to go and find something, someone, some way to incorporate laughter in his life, that life could not be taken too seriously. So he went out and he came back with a blind man that he had met on the train. But this man, though he had lost his vision very, very young, he had developed a sense of humor to get him through life. And so this young man was cracking jokes and pulling the leg of Ted Hamilton the entire time. And Jason presented him as an example of the gift of laughter, that despite this man's circumstances, he still found means and ways to laugh. Next was the gift of dreams. So Red challenged Jason to develop a list of dreams, of things that he would want to do and to become that he was passionate about. He gave him a story of a friend that was passionate about his dreams until the day that he passed. And then he gave him the story about someone who had dreams, but he was not passionate about them and ultimately made a life-altering decision, if you know what I mean. So Jason was challenged to become a dreamer, to have hopes, to have dreams, to figure out what it was he wanted for himself, what it was that he wanted to accomplish. And Jason even admitted that he had really only existed up until that point in his life, and he had never really thought about the future. So he came back and reported his list. He was then challenged with the gift of giving. Now, Red stated that Jason had been given just about everything that he owned. And so he was challenged to give of himself, of his own belongings, whatever that may be, for the next 30 days. And so when he returned to report, all of the things that he gave were intangible things that were intrinsically valuable, such as time, advice, visiting the sick. And even in that 30th day, when he was making his report, he baked cookies for Ted Hamilton and Miss Hastings. So he found creative ways to give of himself that were not money. So again, as the challenges are going on, Ted Hamilton is finding himself quite impressed with Jason's creativity and Jason's ability to maneuver through this process. But it's not over yet, and he still has to keep a good attitude, and he has to finish the challenge all the way through for the entire year to receive the ultimate gift. So the next challenge was the gift of gratitude, to which he told him a story about a friend that developed something called the Golden List. And he said that each morning when this friend woke up, he would imagine a list in his mind's eye of things that he was grateful for. And he challenged Jason to develop his own golden list and to reflect on that, to create a new habit by which he would reflect on that daily. Then he was challenged with the gift of a day. Red wanted Jason to really think about what would be important to him in coming to the end of his life, and how would he choose to spend an ideal day, no matter what that was. Jason came up with a beautiful plan to show love to friends, to reconnect with family, to reconcile broken bonds, and then to throw a party for everyone that he loved. And in making his report, Red's next message to him was that even a last day is just a day, such as any day. So anything that he would imagine that he would do on his last day, he could do any day. Finally, he made it to his last gift, or so he thought. So on the 12th month, he makes it to the gift of love, and Red pours out his heart to Jason to state that he truly held Jason dear to his heart, that he had hope for him and who he could become, that in his plight over the past year, he was trying to show Jason love. And he hoped that Jason understood that that ultimately was what it was. And so he was charging him to go out into the world to continue to spread the gift of love. And that ultimately, the way that he loved Jason was the way that he understood God's love for him. And he wanted Jason to take that into consideration as he moved forward in his life. And so Jason proclaims, I get it. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to spread all these gifts that my uncle has given me. I understand the value of the things that he's done. I've become a totally different person now from who I was a year ago. I understand friends and family and money and all of these things that his uncle really wanted him to truly understand the value of. And he purposed that he was going to continue in the world touching other people, that he wanted to stay in touch with Ted Hamilton and Miss Hastings, that he wanted to stay in touch with the boys at the boys' home, and that was what he was going to go forth in his life and continue to do. So he thought that was it. That, okay, I made it through the year. That was the challenge. Okay, he thought he might get the traditional inheritance. It didn't happen that way, but he was still grateful for the gifts that he had gotten along the way that helped develop him as a person. And then Ted stopped him and said, there is one last gift. So there's one final tape for total of 13 tapes. And Red gives a final message, which is clearly very much a goodbye message to say, you've done well. I'm very proud of you. You know, take all these tools and go forth. The whole point is to have purpose and to love. So again, Jason thinks that this is it. And okay, this has been great. You guys have been great. I'm going to stay in touch. Goodbye. And Ted again has to say, hey, I'm still not done executing Red's estate. So he calls him back into his office to give him the ultimate gift. I'm going to cry. This book moved me. He calls him back into his office and reads the will that states that Jason Stevens was to be given full charge of Red Stevens' charitable trust fund that was worth $1 billion. Jason would be in charge of the library in South America, the boys' home, and all other charity organizations and efforts that Red had established, along with any others that he saw fit to contribute to. So the gift that he had already determined in himself that he was going to share with the world, he now had the funding to support that. And unlike the other heirs, he did not have any middleman to control or manage the funds. He was allotted these funds and trusted with them on his own. And in his excitement, he didn't even ask about his own income and what would become of him. He excitedly left the office and proclaimed that he would keep in touch. And Miss Hastings and Ted Hamilton just kind of have a moment between themselves. And the story ends with Ted Hamilton just reflecting on the whole process and the idea of saying goodbye. And he even rewatched one of Red's tapes to have a final goodbye with one of his friends. Earlier in the story, during the gift of friendship, we find out that Red had received a terminal diagnosis in his early 30s and he needed a kidney. He went to Ted to tell him, we need to find a kidney for me or else I'm not going to make it. After some time, Ted reported to Red that he'd found a kidney from some man states away, and come to find out it was Ted himself that donated Red his own kidney. This story was a very pleasant listen, and the larger message around purpose, meaning, the impact that we have on others, giving and receiving was something that we can all use a reminder of. But also for my believers out there, the story of Red and Jason is likened to God and his children who are not always perfect, who do not always have the best attitudes, who may have arrogance and be ungrateful. And sometimes it just takes a process of pruning and learning and humility in order to receive the things that ultimately you are gifted or are called to manage. And that sometimes you might just be being prepared for the things to come that you're not yet ready for. Jason Stevens, at the time of the reading of the will, was not equipped to carry a $1 billion charity fund. He would not have had the heart or the mind, the empathy, or the love for other people, and to see outside of himself to manage a fund of that magnitude without having to have an executor, the way that Red's own children were. But because with each recording, Red knew, even in his death, that in order for Jason to make it to the next tape, he would have had to successfully complete the previous challenge. And in order to complete a full year of preparation, that he would be ready and that he represented the turning around of the bloodline. And so I challenge you all to read this book. This was another hoopla listen for me. And it was a fairly short read. In total, it was about 2.5 hours. Obviously, it takes a little longer than that when you still have life in between your reading. But it was a great read, and definitely one that I would recommend. If you have a book that you recommend, please feel free to drop your recommendation in the comments. Until next time.